Tonight, 48 hours of pageantry, 60 minutes of talks. But what's actually changed after Donald Trump's state visit to the UK? The US president met the Prime Minister at his country retreat. They agreed on the need to be tougher on Vladimir Putin.
The one that I thought would be easiest would be because of my relationship with President Putin, but he's let me down. He's really let me down.
But there was a moment of tension over the UK's decision to recognise a Palestinian state.
I have a disagreement with the Prime Minister on that score. One of our few disagreements, actually.
Plus, the tech deals described as the biggest ever, more than £250 billion in investment flowing both ways across the Atlantic. And a revelation that the US is negotiating with the Taliban to regain control of Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. Donald Trump says it's because of its proximity to a Chinese site that manufactures nuclear weapons. We'll fact-check that tonight. Also coming up, America's free speech debate after a late-night talk show host is taken off air and goaded by Donald Trump. And Kenya's billion-dollar fake essay industry. We'll find out about the shadow scholars helping students here to launch lucrative careers. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. They are two men, two leaders with very different personalities and very different politics. Today, as Keir Starmer and Donald Trump stood side by side, there's a lot that could have gone wrong. But mostly it went like this. Have a look.
We're united in defence and security. We're also united in the pursuit of peace.
The bond between our countries is like no other.
We have the deepest, most advanced defence relationship in the world.
We're forever joined and we are forever friends and we will always be friends.
Praise and superlatives from both men. In fact, if you ask aides in Downing Street or those travelling back to Washington on Air Force One with the president, they'd probably say this state visit was a big success. Both men dodged conflict and, frankly, the details. Just have a listen to this from Donald Trump.
I'm very honored to tell you that we've solved seven wars that were unsolvable, wars that couldn't be negotiated or done. The U.S. has done 7 of them. The one that I thought would be easiest would be because of my relationship with President Putin, but he's let me down. He's really let me down.
He claims he's solved 7 wars, but you can hear the frustration we've come to expect when he talks about Vladimir Putin. So is the UK actually any better off after laying down the red carpet for Donald Trump? There were billion-dollar deals. We'll bring you more detail on those in a moment and a reinforcement of an unbreakable bond. But what about that plea I heard this week from Ukraine's president for security guarantees? What about Israel's ground operation in Gaza City? There is no evidence yet that the Prime Minister has convinced the US president to change his approach on either war. Diplomacy is a long game. The soft power of the royal family is a powerful tool, and both were deployed effectively to make sure the special relationship remains intact. Here's our first report from Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby.
President hosted in a king's castle. Donald Trump relishing the rarity of this moment.
A great gentleman and a great king.
Full of appreciation for his host as he departed Windsor for the PM's country retreat of Chequers and a political summit that risked being blown off course. A wave to reporters on the way in, the president in good spirits.
Donald Trump has arrived at Chequers and the Prime Minister will be happy with how it went at Windsor Castle. There was pomp and pageantry and plenty of goodwill, but now it's down to the politics, and on that matter, it gets trickier.
A bit more pageantry to kick off proceedings, bagpipes for a president of Scottish heritage as he was welcomed into the weekend residence of Sir Keir and Lady Starmer. The warmth between these two leaders plain to see. And the fruits of that on full display with the signing of a massive US-UK tech deal.
It's a great honor.
Bringing tens of billions of inward investment into the UK, powering the artificial intelligence revolution and new nuclear power.
What is the relationship all about when it comes down to brass tacks? It comes down to leaders, of course, leaders who respect each other, leaders who genuinely like each other. And just look at what we're achieving today together. The deals and investment that you're announcing today break all records.
The ties between our countries are priceless, and it's really an inheritance. It's a beautiful inheritance. Today we're making those ties closer than ever before.
Yet another military display in a visit peppered with tricky manoeuvres. The diplomatic business of this trip needing careful navigation when it comes to wars on two fronts, Gaza and Ukraine, and the potential rupture over the UK's decision to recognise the state of Palestine.
The situation in Gaza is intolerable. The hostages have been held for a very, very long time, and they must be freed. And we need aid to get into Gaza at speed. And so it's within that context that the question of recognition needs to be seen.
So I have a disagreement with the Prime Minister on that score. Okay? One of our few disagreements, actually.
But there is broad agreement on Hamas.
Let me be really clear about Hamas. They're a terrorist organisation who can have no part in any future governance in Palestine. And what happened on October the 7th was the worst attack since the Holocaust.
And on Russia, the president critical of Putin.
The one that I thought would be easiest would be because of my relationship with President Putin, but he's let me down.
Mr. President, if I may, the King praised your personal commitment last night to finding solutions to the world's most intractable conflicts. You have invested much of your time and effort in Ukraine. But even as you seek to broker a deal, President Putin is escalating the war. He's firing drones into NATO airspace. You say he has let you down. Was it a mistake to invite him to Alaska? Do you regret it?
No.
And is it time to squeeze him, sir, and scare him and impose sanctions?
Very simply, if the price of oil comes down, Putin's going to drop out. He's going to have no choice. He's going to drop out of that war. If the oil price comes down, very simply, Russia will settle. And the oil price is way down. You know, we got it way down.
But there was one issue overhanging this media conference missing until the end.
The elephant in the room, Lord Mandelson, he is no longer the ambassador. Do you have some sympathy with him that he lost his job over historic links to Jeffrey Epstein? Thank you very much, sir.
I don't know him, actually. I had heard that, and I think maybe the Prime Minister would be better speaking of that. That was a choice that he made, and I don't know. What is your answer to that?
Well, I mean, it's very straightforward. Some information came to light last week which wasn't available when he was appointed, and I made a decision about it, and that's very clear.
A difficult issue dodged in a state visit where these leaders were keen to stay in line.
President Trump there is leaving the UK after this historic state visit, and I think number 10 will take it all as a win. Billions of dollars of investment into the UK economy, a strengthened special relationship, and avoiding any diplomatic blow-ups on the matters of Peter Mandelson or Gaza. So this then became a moment of respite for the Prime Minister, but he still faces real domestic woes here at home.
But this visit has at least given Keir Starmer a much-needed lift after some of the most difficult weeks of his premiership. His team hopes he can use this momentum to turn his government's fortunes around, but it's a very long journey ahead. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Chequers.
So no big surprises, no public fallouts at that news conference between the two leaders, but there was one apparently rogue comment from the US president. Just have a listen.
We're trying to get it back, by the way, okay? That could be a little breaking news. We're trying to get it back because they need things from us. We want that base back. But one of the reasons we want the base is, as you know, it's an hour away from where China makes its nuclear weapons. So a lot of things are happening, but I am very disappointed in the fact that that one's not settled.
Of course, the US president was talking there about Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, once America's biggest air base in the country, but now controlled by the Taliban after the United States' chaotic withdrawal from the country in 2022. Well, let's go straight to our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who joins me from Windsor this evening. Mark, good to see you. So much to unpack from that press conference, but let's begin with Bagram, of course. You know, this has been a sore point for Donald Trump for some time now. I recall a number of Fox News interviews that he has done where he's talked about that chaotic withdrawal, pinning all the blame on Joe Biden. But this sort of came as a bit of a surprise to many people that he was in these talks to try and get the airbase back.
Yeah, a big surprise, actually. And I think I'm not sure if he meant to announce it. It sort of came as part of, sort of out of nowhere. And he sort of said halfway through, as you heard, oh, this might be breaking news for you. And it hasn't really been picked up. And we've asked the Department of Defense, or Department of War, as it's now called, for any details. They've not given us any at the moment. But Bagram is strategically massively important. And for all the criticism of the way that the Biden administration withdrew from Afghanistan in such a hurry, like the sticking plaster pulled off so quickly, and the chaos which followed, the Taliban returning, the one really big strategic disaster, I think many military types would say, is the loss of Bagram. Somehow they should have held on to that because it's such a strategically important airbase in the world, in that part of the world, in East Asia. And as Trump pointed out himself, it is only 100, I think he's at an hour or so. It's close to China and the part of China where its own nuclear weapons are said to be stored, perhaps made as well. So you can see for America why it'd be strategically important to hold on to a place like that. And yet they didn't, they handed it over. But what's intriguing, and I'm keen for your take on this as well, is that although he didn't say it, if he is in negotiations about getting it back, he can only be in negotiations with one group of people, and that's the Taliban.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. You know, so the announcement was a surprise, I think, to many. But those of us who are in contact with the Taliban, who are Afghanistan watchers, didn't find the idea of this surprising, because every time Donald Trump has mentioned Afghanistan, he's spoken about Bagram. So we kind of had an idea that this kind of thing may happen. In fact, you know, some of the Taliban leaders that I've been speaking to have sort of said, well, you know, we're not totally against the idea of the Americans somehow coming back and maybe wanting that base back. Don't forget, Mark, you know, it was in the dead of night that the Americans slipped out of that base, basically turned the lights out, and their Afghan allies were completely shocked by what happened. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say they also left a huge amount of equipment, and for a man who's so keen on American equipment and on not wanting waste, Trump was very angry about all the equipment that was left. But I guess the key question is, if the Taliban is willing to allow America to be based, I mean, that would be remarkable, but to be based again in Afghanistan at Bagram, what would they be getting in return? He's a transactional president, as we have seen over the course of the past couple of days.
Yeah, what they would be getting is some kind of normalization, some kind of recognition, coming back from the cold, which is something that they are desperate for. And they wrote all sorts of letters to Joe Biden, pleading, saying, look, we don't have a problem with America. We have a problem with you controlling our country, but we have no problem with having some kind of normal relationship with you. And I guess in many ways, Donald Trump, you know, is he concerned about girls not having any education, women being forced out of the public eye? for the sake of getting Bagram back and all that equipment and, you know, taking on China in this great power competition? Perhaps not. But Mark, there was so much more that came out of that press conference, and I want to unpack all of that for you, because another key moment was when the president told our political editor that he did not know the former UK ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson. That's despite this moment in the Oval Office back in May. Just have a look.
Thank you very much. It was beautifully stated. What a beautiful accent, too. I'd like to have that accent. Thank you.
My mother would be proud.
Thank you very much.
So Mark, Donald Trump saying there that he doesn't really know who Peter Mandelson is. Yeah. Just talk us through that.
I laughed at that moment. It was funny because in one moment, Donald Trump did two things. He threw Keir Starmer a hospital pass by basically saying, I have no idea who this guy is, and, you know, this Epstein thing, I'm not going to go there. You could take this one to the Prime Minister, who then, laid out his line on why Mandelson had been fired. But the other point, I mean, it's clearly nonsense. Donald Trump knows exactly who Peter Mandelson is, because he was Britain's ambassador. Every time Keir Starmer's gone to the White House, Mandelson would be there, and of course he was there in that moment that you just played. But what's also quite amusing is that Donald Trump managed, I think accidentally, to undermine the British argument for why they put Peter Mandelson in that position, because their argument has consistently been, up until this week, they've said we put him there because he's kind of the Trump whisperer. He's got to know Donald Trump really very well, and it's all been very, very useful as we have become closer to the Trump administration. And then the president comes out and says, never heard of him.
Yeah, as you say, quite an extraordinary moment, especially when Peter Mandelson had boasted about Donald Trump describing him as a handsome man or something along those lines. But the other point that came out of this press conference, of course, was this idea of the recognition of Palestinian statehood, which we know will be a big talking point at the UN General Assembly. Both you and I will be there next week covering the issue. It was the one moment that Donald Trump said, listen, this is something that the Prime Minister and I, don't necessarily meet eye to eye on.
Yeah, but I thought actually that was indicative of a broader sort of theme that has emerged over the course of today only, I think, at Chequers, which is that the rapport between President Trump and Prime Minister Starmer it's incredibly unlikely. I mean, they're politically very far apart, but we've seen this rapport in the past in the Oval Office. We've heard that Donald Trump has repeatedly said, or volunteered the fact that he really likes Keir Starmer. I spoke to Susie Wiles, the Chief of Staff of the White House today. She emphasised that as well. She said that it almost surprised her just how well they get on. The reason I'm making this point is because I think that over the course of today, we have seen the beginnings of perhaps a new special relationship where in this new mercurial president, you never know quite what he's going to do. I think Keir Starmer has got to a place with him, and he hopes that Britain has got to a place with America where they can agree to disagree without America and without Trump throwing his toys out the pram and then punishing Britain for having disagreed with him. And I think on that point, or to that point, the whole recognition of Palestine thing is an example of that, because I think it was clear that they disagreed. We know the Americans do not want a recognition of Palestine because they see it as emboldening Hamas. The Brits completely disagree on that, but they seem to be able to come to a sort of an agreement to disagree, which I think, if that can be extended to other areas, I think Britain will see that as a diplomatic win, because so many countries around the world are really worried about in any way going against the grain with America, because they think they'll get punished on tariffs or all the rest of it.
Mark, as always, thank you so much for all of your coverage and your analysis there. Now, the US president has long said he could rapidly solve the war in Ukraine, but has failed to make any headway since taking office. I met with the Ukrainian president in Kyiv earlier this week. You remember he told me Putin is trying to trick Donald Trump into avoiding sanctions. Mr. Zelensky was also very clear about what he hoped to see from Trump and Starmer when they met in the UK this week. I just want to bring you a bit of our conversation now.
I very much hope that Prime Minister Starmer will be able to have a very specific discussion on the security guarantees of the United States for Ukraine. And before we end the war, I really want to have all the agreements in place. I want to have a document that is supported by the US and all European partners. This is very important. This is a very motivating thing for a Ukrainian military, so that they realize we will end the war and we will be protected. And to make this happen, we need a clear position of the President Trump.
Volodymyr Zelensky speaking to me there exclusively just a few days ago. So did they discuss security guarantees? Will Ukraine be protected if the war ends? Well, we simply don't know. Neither leader addressed that issue today. But Keir Starmer did urge both the US president and European allies to ramp up the pressure on Vladimir Putin. Have a listen.
We have to put extra pressure on Putin. And it's only when the president has put pressure on Putin that he's actually shown any inclination to move. So we have to ramp that pressure up. I think it's important to have this conversation in the context of what's happened in recent weeks. And if you put that together, what you can see is either an emboldenment or at least an increased recklessness on Putin's part. And that's why I said earlier that they're not the actions of someone who wants peace.
I'm joined now by former US Deputy National Security Advisor under Donald Trump, Katie McFarland. Mr. McFarland, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Rather, Miss McFarland. Look, there's so much that we can discuss from that press conference, but I've just returned from Ukraine. I've just spoken to President Zelensky, who was extremely frustrated with the words he's been hearing from both the European leaders and Donald Trump, but no real action. And I asked him if he thought Alaska was a mistake. He didn't quite say it in those words, but he did say, look, the red carpet was rolled out. And frankly, we have been getting a barrage of missiles and drones being launched on our cities across the country.
Yes. And I think when President Trump has come a long way from where he might have been a year or two ago, or even 6 months ago, and he thought that the negotiation with Putin and Zelensky would be one of the easiest things to solve. He thought they would both come to the negotiating table, there'd be some give and take, but at the end of the day, there would be a peace agreement where maybe Ukraine gave up some land, but Russia would stop the war. But it didn't happen. Now, it's now, as you found out with your interview, Zelensky is willing to come to the negotiating table, but Putin is not. So when President Trump has said, okay, maybe we're ready for the next step, which is some significant economic sanctions against Russia, he means it. But he also means for the Europeans to stop buying Russian oil and gas. When President Trump has said, look, Russia never would have invaded if I had been president, what he means is a couple of things. One, probably they wouldn't have invaded, but number two, they wouldn't have had the money to invade. And the reason Putin had the money, the $300 billion that he needed to go to war with Ukraine, was because Europe was buying Russian oil and natural gas. Now, they've started weaning themselves off of Russian oil and natural gas, but they're not off completely. Britain is. But there are other countries in Europe which continue to supply Russia with the money to fight the war.
What Volodymyr Zelensky was saying was he saw that as a valid point that President Trump was holding Europe accountable and saying you shouldn't be buying Russian oil and gas. But he also said, look, they've already put together a number of sanction packages and the United States is in a position not to wait for Europe to stop buying this oil and gas and do something now to punish Russia and Putin, and he just doesn't feel like President Trump is serious about that.
You know, I guess I would look at it from the American perspective. President Trump was now trying to do a couple of things. He wanted to end the Ukraine war. He wanted to guarantee Ukraine's security. But at the same time, he didn't want to jettison any possibility of an improved relationship with the United States and Russia after a peace agreement. And he's now in a position where he's going to have to make some tough choices in the next couple of weeks. But to make those tough choices, he's gone to the Europeans and said, look, it's not only going to be the United States that has to feel some pain. If you're not willing to stop buying Russian oil and natural gas, then we really need to reconsider the whole scenario. You've got to do something too. And I think that's the frustration that Americans have, is that we're supposed to do everything. And yet the Europeans who want us to do more, they're not willing to do their fair share of cutting back their enablement of Russia to fight this war.
Do you believe that President Trump isn't fully using the leverage that he has over the likes of Vladimir Putin, over Benjamin Netanyahu, that he, says things that sound tough, but ultimately the sorts of things that he's talked about, getting the hostages back, bringing the war in Gaza to an end, bringing the war in Ukraine to an end, campaigning on these things and saying that he's going to famously do it in 24 hours, suddenly realizing that these things are, very difficult to resolve, but also not using the full leverage that he has because of the relationship that he has with these two men?
I guess I would disagree. I think President Trump has shown, whether it was in bombing the nuclear sites in Iran, and every other negotiation he's had, as he points out, he's brought peace to places nobody thought there would ever be peace agreements to in the last several months. He's not succeeded as he had hoped to with the Middle East, with Israel, Gaza, and he's not succeeded as he hoped to with Putin and Ukraine. But it doesn't mean he's not trying, and it doesn't mean he's not pivoting to try to find some other way to do it, short of, as he pointed out today, a few months ago, people were thinking maybe we'd have World War III over Ukraine. So what I think he's doing is trying to hold our European friends' feet to the fire. If you want me to do something for the United States, to take these certain actions and use the United States leverage, why aren't you doing your fair share? Now, it's to the credit of the Europeans, they have indeed ramped up their defense spending. They had not before. They were freeloading and free riding, but they are ramping up their defense spending. But what they're not doing is stopping the flow of money that's going from Europe to Russia. So from the U.S. perspective, why should we suffer to pay for a war that you guys are enabling? You want us to do something. Well, we want you to do something too. And that's why I think President Trump is going to look and see, where are the Europeans? Are they really going to do everything that they can? Are they going to use their leverage to try to stop the Ukraine war, or do they just expect America to do everything else?
Katie McFarland, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
So what about the deals that we heard today? Huge sums being talked about. The Prime Minister said £250 billion will be flowing both ways across the Atlantic after this visit. He described it as the biggest investment package of its kind in British history by a country mile. That includes £150 billion of investment from US companies on things like data centres and defence innovation. The agreement is supposed to create over 7,600 jobs across the UK. Well, our business and economics correspondent Gurpreet Narwan is here. And Gurpreet, we heard these sorts of huge sums in the Middle East as well. And there was concern, actually, the last time he was in the Middle East, the last time he was president, that some of these investments never sort of got off the ground. Is there a feeling that these investments are real?
Yeah, I mean, we also had some questions about how many of them are new, how many of them have been pre-announced. Are they actually going to take off, as you pointed out? And, it wouldn't be the first time that Number 10 has re-announced a set of investments. But we asked Number 10 how many of them are new, and they said they are all new, and they are very much happening, that the plans are in place. I think what is interesting is, these deals just didn't come out of thin air. It hasn't been a day, 2 days, a week, even a month. They've been in the pipeline. It's been a process for some time. To take NVIDIA, for example, NVIDIA has just announced a massive investment to build data centres in the northeast of England with OpenAI and the British company Nscale. And that was announced with great fanfare. But Jensen Huang, the chief executive of NVIDIA, was at London Tech Week back in June, laying out his intention to do just this. And Sir Keir Starmer said that Britain would provide the energy to ensure that these AI data centres could run effectively. And what we got today really was some more flesh on the bones, some more details about exactly where those data centres were going to go. We don't have timescales on how quickly they're going to be built. So let's wait and see on all of that. These things can't be built overnight, but it's been a process to get here. And what the government has done, there's no government money going into this, is sort of package all of this up into one big announcement that sends a real signal about Britain's relationship with the US, its economic relationship with the US, but also about the AI industry and how pivotal it's going to be in our economic growth.
Yeah, because I guess, coming here with the tech bros, which is also what we saw with his visit to the Middle East, is a message coming from the US as well. We want to be, and we are on the road to being, an AI superpower. If you want to come on board, because the UK, I guess, doesn't want to be left behind if everyone else is moving ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was really interesting. I spoke to Jensen Huang yesterday, the chief executive of NVIDIA, and he wasn't talking about the US as a tech superpower, even though obviously it is. He kept saying Britain is the next superpower. He said, we have the capability here to get to superpower status. And I'm sure that was a bit of flattery from the chief executive of a major company coming to Britain. But it was interesting that he mentioned how humble Britain is, how self-deprecating we are about our own skills and our own talent here in the UK. And let's not forget, we have some of the best universities in the world, some of the best AI minds, researchers, scientific innovation. But what we lack is the scale, the capital, that supercomputing power. And Jensen Huang was giving it the big sell, saying, the Americans will come here, will help you build that digital infrastructure, and then your AI ingenuity can thrive on top of that. But I think it's worth pointing out, Yalda, that actually there is a little bit of suspicion about all this attention from the US, about what they are after now and also what they might be after in the future. Some are saying, is this really the best way to be building our own AI champions in the UK? And should we be looking to France, for example, who have their own AI champion like Mistral? Where's ours?
Yeah, and I guess this is a president that is incredibly transactional as well. Gurpreet, thank you so much. Welcome back. Now to a hidden industry that's generating billions of dollars a year, which has been exposed in a new documentary. Shadow Scholars follows an Oxford professor as she travels to Nairobi to meet some of the highly educated Kenyans earning a living by writing essays for students here in the UK and around the world. Have a look.
There are 40,000 people in Nairobi alone, who's doing this. Who are those people? Those are humans, right? That's like, what's their story? How did they even get to do this?
Supposing you try logging in the accounts in Kenya, they shut it down. The moment you use the VPN, your location is shifted. After which now it's safe to log into the account and work from there. No one can actually tell that you're not in the country.
Well, I'm joined here in the studio by Oxford professor Patricia Kingori. You saw her there in the piece, and Eloise King, the director of the Shadow Scholars. Thank you both for joining us here on the programme. This is an extraordinary documentary that exposes this whole other world. But it took 3.5 years. Just talk us through the trust that you had to build with these students and the people on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first and foremost, it was just an industry that had never really been looked at in detail. And so when we went to Kenya for the first time, for the film specifically, Patricia and I were really keen that they understood what our agenda was. And that was to understand more about the industry, but also find a space in which there was to celebrate the immense amount of talent. And so over the 3.5 years of filming, we would hold regular town halls for like 2 hours where we said, come out, ask us questions about things that are concerning you, things that you're worried about, anything that is a problem that's arising, and like, let's see if we can work on this together. So it was a real sort of collaborative effort in an attempt to tell a story that hadn't been told before.
Yeah, and a real journey, because Patricia, you've been researching this issue for some time. I mean, you are a professor at Oxford. Why did this issue come to your attention?
It came to my attention really first in the form of numbers. So I found out about the numbers of people who were doing this in Nairobi, but it was clear that there really wasn't much research on who are these people. It just seemed to me really extraordinary that we could count roughly how many there were, and we knew the percentage of people in Kenya who were doing this work. but actually, like, what's it like to write a PhD for someone? You know, what is it like to write multiple PhDs for some people living out in the world? For me, that was the thing I felt really needed to come to the fore, to really hear those voices.
What are the numbers?
Well, they estimate, it's difficult to pinpoint because then the market shrinks and expands according to what students need. But when we were filming, they estimated from really around 40 to 50,000 at any one time just in Nairobi. And we know that obviously it's other parts of Kenya as well. So it's huge numbers. I mean, we're talking about $1 billion industry.
And that's, I mean, it's not just the numbers that we're talking about and the fact that it is $1 billion industry. I guess the question is, you know, they trusted you to tell their story. They are making money from this. Why did they want to talk? Because it does expose them in many ways and it could impact business.
I think there are a couple of things, like Professor Patricia Ngori and I, ahead of going, shared profiles of ourselves and said, would you be willing to meet with us? And so the point at which we met with the first groups of writers, they had researched us, they'd looked up Patricia's sort of track record and also mine. And I think that was a real move towards agency. And they said, you know, like, we know what you've done, we understand the work, this might be something that's possible. So I think that was the first phase. And then over time, it's really a case as a filmmaker of proving that what you say is true, that we're not going to put anything out without your consent. We're going to keep being in a dialogue with you about this. And the reason that they were willing to talk about the industry is that I think they felt maligned. And I think that a lot of people can understand the ways in which the Global South has been incorrectly positioned as being a space of only needing aid or support, when actually they really understood within themselves that not only did they love education, but that they were supporting education to other people around the world.
I mean, and not just supporting education, as you say, writing multiple PhDs, you know, one person writing for, you know, a number of students around the world here in the UK is quite something when you sort of think about it.
It's crazy. I mean, really, the analogy that I've used before, it's equivalent to sort of you and I feeling really good that we kind of go out regularly to the gym or for a jog, and then going to an Olympic village and seeing people really sort of athletes. You know, it's that difference. You know, what's it like? I just couldn't get my head around the psychology of it, and to actually see them, and an essay would come in on a subject they knew nothing about, and to have to turn that around in 4 hours, 5 hours.
And they're researching from scratch.
Completely.
And the thing is, they're having this build-up of knowledge, right? So the fact that they're doing this time and time again, so writers that we featured in the film, one of them, Moses, you could literally see on his desktop how many times he delivered. So he's written over 1,000 essays. And so actually it's not just about going from scratch. There was a database, there was a knowledge base that they are working from, and that's why they're so good at what they do.
It's almost like a ChatGPT type, you
know,
it's all
like, you know, before
in.
there's ChatGPT, there really were the shadow scholars.
Talk us through the fake ID situation, because many of them have had to change their identities and their names. It goes back to what you're talking about, the feeling maligned in the Global South. You have to have a Western name to be seen and recognised.
Yeah.
Shall I?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think, you know, they've very quickly realised that if they presented themselves to the world as themselves, they just wouldn't get any business. Because people just don't believe that this thing is happening in Kenya. So they have to adopt identities, they have to change their VPN to present themselves as being in a US town or in a UK town or somewhere in Australia in order to get that work.
So hang on, they don't actually, the people who ask them to write these don't know that they're in Kenya?
No.
No, which is such a big part of like the shadow and the masking of where the skill and the talent are coming from.
Western names, but people knew they were doing it out of Kenya.
So often what happens is there are websites who act as conduits, so the middlemen. They will host the bids for the student. So the student says, I need this piece of work. The writers will then bid on it. But what they were finding was that, one, their IP addresses were being blocked if they were coming from Africa and Kenya specifically, and also that they just weren't getting volumes of work at all or being selected if they were using black pictures with their real names. And so they adopted white faces and white names, you know, in order to just make themselves more viable within a market that was doubly sort of prejudiced against them.
Patricia, what are you hoping comes out of this documentary now that there is this awareness about this billion-dollar industry that exists? What are you hoping it sort of shines a light on?
I think that this documentary will shine a light on the possibility that maybe the way that we think the world works isn't quite how it works. That there are people out there who are really talented, and if they had the opportunity, we would have a different world. And I think for me, you know, shining a light on this work, I think, allows us to see these really intelligent Kenyans as just in need of opportunity.
Because even knowing this, it still doesn't mean that they have the power, really.
Absolutely not. And I think one of the things is that Patricia really adeptly explores in the film is the way in which power makes things feel invisible, that this is the way that they're supposed to be. And actually, we know that the writers have this talent, and so it will take people in power, people with jobs, like policy, legislation, recognising that maybe you can have research centres that are based in Kenya where they can directly be doing the work without having to have this conduit, but also that they can access universities in the global north without having to do it on behalf of someone else, because they're already in these spaces, they're already doing the work, and the talent is undeniably there.
Louise King, Professor Kingori, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, I just want to bring you an update on a story which has been developing throughout the day. A gunman has killed 2 Israeli soldiers at an Israeli-run border crossing between the occupied West Bank and Jordan. Jordan's foreign minister said the gunman was an aid delivery driver. He was shot dead at the scene. Israel has halted the delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza from Jordan while an investigation takes place. Now, it's been an important week for the UK and the United States. I just want to end the programme tonight with the best moments from the state visit described by Donald Trump as an exquisite honour. Have a look.
Our countries are working together in support of crucial diplomatic efforts.
This is truly one of the highest honors of my life. A great gentleman. A great gentleman and a great king.
Hi. Who's this? What are you doing? What any of them are called. Oh, so beautiful.
He's a tough negotiator. I think it was a better deal for you than us, but these are minor details.
It's a very good deal for both of us.
He's a great negotiator.
President Trump and the First Lady departing the United Kingdom back to the United States. And of course, there are major developments next week as well as the UN General Assembly kicks off. We will be there, the team and I, looking at the various issues that will be covered there, including the recognition of a Palestinian state. So we will be covering that at length on Monday. But of course, the issues around Ukraine will also be discussed, and President Zelensky will be there as well. So do join us. But for now, from me and the World team, good night.